I never thought a pickup truck with a plow attachment would turn my quiet life in Millbrook, Vermont into a full-blown legal nightmare. But here I was, staring down the barrel of the most vindictive homeowners association board I had ever encountered. My name is Owen Bradley, and I had lived in the Pinewood Estates development for 3 years before everything went sideways. I worked as an independent contractor doing property maintenance, and during winter months, that meant snow removal. Vermont winters are no joke, and my 2018 Ford F350 with the 8-foot Boss V plow attached was essential to my livelihood. I kept that truck parked in my driveway, clean and well-maintained, because I took pride in my equipment and my work. The trouble started on a gray November morning when I found a bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door. The paper flapped in the cold wind as I pulled it free, squinting at the printed text. According to the Pinewood Estates HOA, my truck violated Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines, which prohibited commercial vehicles from being parked in plain view on residential properties. I read the notice 3 times, each time getting more frustrated. The letter was signed by Karen Morrison, the HOA president, and demanded I remove the vehicle within 72 hours or face daily fines of $100. I crumpled the notice and went back inside to dig out my copy of the HOA bylaws. I had read them when I bought the house, but that was years ago and I needed to refresh my memory. After 20 minutes of searching through the dense legal language, I found Section 7.3. It did mention commercial vehicles, but the definition was vague and seemed to apply more to delivery trucks, semi-trailers, and vehicles with business advertising plastered all over them. My truck had no business logos, no company name painted on the side. It was just a regular pickup with a plow attachment that I could remove if needed. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, a small converted house near the entrance of our development. Karen Morrison sat behind a cheap wooden desk, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She was maybe 50 years old, with the kind of pinched expression that suggested she spent most of her time finding fault with everything around her. "Mr. Bradley," she said before I could even introduce myself, "I assume you are here about the violation notice." "I am," I said, keeping my voice level. "I think there has been a misunderstanding. My truck is not a commercial vehicle in the sense that the bylaws describe. It is a personal vehicle that I use for work." Karen folded her hands on the desk and gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. "The HOA board reviewed your situation at our last meeting. The truck in question has a commercial-grade snow plow attached to it. That makes it commercial equipment, which violates our community standards. We have a reputation to maintain here in Pinewood Estates." "But I need that truck for my job," I protested. "I have contracts with a dozen properties in the area. Without it, I cannot work during the winter." "Then I suggest you find alternative parking arrangements," Karen said, her tone making it clear the discussion was over. "You could rent a storage unit, or perhaps park it at a business location. What you cannot do is continue to keep it in your driveway where it diminishes the aesthetic appeal of our neighborhood." I tried reasoning with her for another 10 minutes, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Karen kept circling back to the same points: commercial equipment, community standards, property values. She mentioned that several neighbors had complained, though she refused to tell me who. I left the office feeling like I had just wasted half an hour of my life. Over the next few days, I talked to some of my neighbors to get a sense of whether anyone actually cared about my truck. Old Gerald Patterson next door said he never even noticed it. The Ramirez family across the street said they liked seeing it because it made them feel safer knowing someone nearby could handle heavy snow. Nobody I spoke to had any problem with my truck. That told me everything I needed to know about Karen's claims of multiple complaints. The 72-hour deadline came and went. I did not move my truck. The next violation notice arrived with an added fine schedule, $100 per day, with the amount increasing to $200 per day after the first week. I was furious, but tried to stay calm. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting to make my case directly to the full board, not just Karen. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community center, a bland room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. About 20 residents showed up, which was apparently a good turnout. The board consisted of 5 people: Karen as president, Donald Simmons as vice president, Patricia Wells as treasurer, Mark Chen as secretary, and Linda Foster as a general board member. They sat at a folding table at the front of the room, looking very official and self-important. When the open forum portion of the meeting arrived, I stood up and walked to the microphone set up in the aisle. I explained my situation calmly and clearly. I talked about how I used the truck for legitimate work, how it was not covered in advertising, how none of my immediate neighbors had complained about it. I pointed out that the bylaws were ambiguous and that I believed my truck did not meet the definition of a prohibited commercial vehicle. Karen listened with her arms crossed, her expression growing more annoyed by the second. When I finished, she did not even wait for questions from other board members before responding. "Mr. Bradley, we have already made our decision on this matter," she said. "The board voted unanimously that your vehicle violates our community standards. The fines will continue to accrue until you comply with the violation notice. If you wish to contest this decision, you may hire an attorney and pursue legal action, but I can assure you that we have consulted with our own legal counsel and we are confident in our position." I looked at the other board members, hoping one of them might show some reason or flexibility, but they all nodded along with Karen's statement. Donald even added that they needed to enforce the rules equally for everyone, as if there were dozens of other people parking commercial equipment in their driveways. There were not. I was the only one. Defeated, I sat back down. The meeting continued with discussions about holiday decorations, a proposal to repaint the community center, and complaints about dog waste in the common areas. I left as soon as it ended, my mind already working through my limited options. Hiring a lawyer would cost thousands of dollars with no guarantee of success. I could move the truck, but that would mean renting storage space I could not really afford, and it would add significant time and hassle to my work routine. Every snow removal job would require me to drive to the storage facility first, get the truck, do the work, and return it before going home. In the middle of a snowstorm, that could add hours to an already long day. I decided to call the HOA's bluff. I kept the truck in my driveway and ignored the fines. They were just paper threats anyway, I figured. What were they actually going to do about it? December arrived with unusually cold temperatures and forecasts of heavy snow. My phone started ringing with clients confirming their winter contracts. I had 12 properties on my roster: a small office building, 2 apartment complexes, a church, several elderly residents who could not handle snow removal themselves, and a veterinary clinic. I took pride in being reliable. When it snowed, people knew they could count on me to clear their driveways and parking lots quickly and professionally. The first major snowstorm hit on December 10th. We got 14 inches overnight, and I was up at 4 in the morning, fueling up the truck and checking the plow blade. By the time the sun came up, I had already cleared 3 properties. It was exhausting work, but satisfying. I liked being useful. I liked knowing that people could get to work or to doctor's appointments because I had cleared the way for them. When I got home around noon for a quick lunch break, I found another notice on my door. This one was different. It was from a law firm representing the Pinewood Estates, HOA. The letter informed me that I had accumulated over $2,000 in fines, and that the HOA was prepared to place a lien on my property if I did not pay immediately. A lien would cloud my home's title and could eventually lead to foreclosure if left unresolved. My appetite vanished. I sat at my kitchen table reading and rereading the letter. This was serious. They were actually going to come after my house over a parking dispute. I felt the walls closing in. I had some savings, but not enough to pay thousands in bogus fines and hire a lawyer to fight the HOA. I was trapped. That evening, I called a lawyer anyway. His name was James Peterman, and he specialized in property law. After I explained my situation, he was quiet for a moment. "These HOA disputes are tricky," he finally said. "The problem is that when you bought your home, you signed the bylaws agreement. That gave the HOA certain powers over your property. Whether their interpretation of the commercial vehicle clause is correct is debatable, but fighting it will require going to court. That means filing fees, discovery, possibly a trial. We're looking at $5,000 to $10,000 in legal costs, minimum, and there's no guarantee you would win." I thanked him and hung up feeling even worse. I could not afford to fight, but I could not afford to give in either. The truck was my livelihood. The second snowstorm came 3 days later, another 12 inches. Then a third storm brought 8 more inches the following week. Vermont was getting hammered with snow, and I was working around the clock trying to keep up with my contracts. The truck ran perfectly. The plow cut through the heavy, wet snow like it was nothing. Every time I used it, I thought about how absurd it was that the HOA wanted to ban it from my own driveway. On December 20th, things escalated in a way I never expected. I came home after a long day of snow removal to find a towing notice attached to my truck's windshield. The HOA had hired a towing company to impound my vehicle. They were coming the next morning at 8. I immediately moved the truck to the street, thinking that would solve the problem. If it was not in my driveway, maybe they would leave it alone. But the next morning, I woke to the sound of a diesel engine and metal scraping. I rushed outside in my pajamas and boots to find a flatbed tow truck backing up to my pickup. The tow operator, a beefy guy in a stained jacket, was preparing to winch my truck onto his flatbed. "Hey, stop," I shouted, running toward him. "You cannot tow that." "Got a work order from the HOA," he said, barely looking at me. "Vehicle in violation of community standards, authorized for removal." "It is parked on the public street," I said, pointing at the ground. "The HOA has no authority over the public street." The tow operator paused and pulled out his phone, calling someone. After a brief conversation, he unhooked the chains from my truck. "Fine, whatever. I am not getting in the middle of your dispute." He climbed back into his truck and drove off. I was shaking with anger and adrenaline. This was harassment, plain and simple. I went inside and sent a strongly worded email to Karen Morrison, copying the entire HOA board. I explained that their attempt to tow my vehicle from a public street was illegal, and that I would be documenting all further harassment. I did not expect it to change anything, but I wanted a paper trail. Karen's response came within an hour. It was brief and cold. "The HOA takes violations of our community standards very seriously. Your continued defiance has forced us to pursue all available remedies. The fines will continue to accrue, and we will proceed with the lien process. Additionally, we are exploring options to have your vehicle declared a public nuisance." I showed the email to my neighbor Gerald, who had lived in Pinewood Estates for over 20 years. He shook his head in disgust. Karen has always been power-hungry, but this is next level. She forced out the last HOA president by making his life miserable over ridiculous violations. She is not going to back down because she sees this as a challenge to her authority. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. Gerald shrugged. "Honestly, most people just give in. It is easier than fighting. But if you want my opinion, she is going to push this until something breaks. Question is whether it will be you or her." The next few days were tense but quiet. Christmas was approaching, and even Karen seemed to take a break from harassing me. I kept my truck parked on the street as much as possible and moved it to my driveway only when actively loading or unloading equipment. It was inconvenient and probably did not make any legal difference, but it gave me a small sense of control. The fourth major snowstorm of the season hit on December 27th. This one was a monster, a nor'easter that dumped over 20 inches of snow across the region in less than 24 hours. The wind howled, creating drifts that buried cars and made roads impassable. I was out all night with the plow, working until my eyes burned from exhaustion and my hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. The entire town of Millbrook was paralyzed. The state plows could not keep up with the snowfall. Side streets went unplowed for days. Pinewood Estates, being a private development, was responsible for clearing its own internal roads, but the HOA's contracted snow removal company was overwhelmed and behind schedule. Our neighborhood streets were buried under 2 feet of snow. That is when the mail problem started. On December 29th, I noticed the mail truck turn into our development, drive about 50 feet, and then carefully back out and leave. I thought maybe the driver had taken a wrong turn, but the same thing happened the next day. On December 31st, I walked down to the mailbox cluster at the entrance of the development and found a notice posted on it. The United States Postal Service notice stated that mail delivery to Pinewood Estates was temporarily suspended due to unsafe road conditions. The notice cited federal regulations that protected postal workers from having to traverse hazardous conditions. Residents could pick up their mail at the main post office in Millbrook, but delivery would not resume until the streets were safe and passable. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The HOA's incompetence with snow removal had created this problem, and now the entire neighborhood would suffer. But I also felt bad for the elderly residents and anyone who depended on regular mail delivery for medications or important documents. The HOA office was closed for the holidays, so I could not even call to complain. Not that it would have done any good. Instead, I went home and watched as more and more neighbors discovered the suspension notice. A small crowd gathered by the mailboxes, everyone talking at once, frustrated and angry. On January 2nd, the HOA office reopened. Karen Morrison arrived to find her voicemail full and a line of angry residents waiting outside. I was not there for the initial confrontation, but I heard about it from multiple people. Apparently, Karen tried to blame the snow removal contractor, claiming they had not fulfilled their obligations. She promised to find a backup company to clear the streets immediately. But here is the thing about snow removal companies in Vermont during a heavy winter. They are all booked solid. Every plow operator in the region was working 18-hour days trying to keep up with their existing contracts. Nobody was available for emergency work in a residential development, especially one with a reputation for difficult management. Days passed. The streets remained buried. More snow fell, another 8 inches on January 4th. The Postal Service suspension continued. Residents started getting desperate. One elderly man told me he was expecting medication that was now sitting at the post office, but he could not get there because his car was snowed in and the roads were impassable anyway. I saw an opportunity, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to let the HOA stew in the consequences of their own actions. They had made my life hell over the truck, and now that truck was exactly what they needed. But the other part of me, the part that had chosen this line of work because I liked helping people, knew I could not just sit by and watch my neighbors suffer. On January 5th, I sent an email to Karen Morrison. I kept it professional and to the point. I explained that I had the equipment and availability to clear the Pinewood Estates streets within 2 days. I provided my standard commercial rate, which was fair and probably cheaper than any other company she might find, if she could even find one. I offered to start immediately upon approval. The response came 6 hours later, and it was not from Karen but from Donald Simmons, the vice president. He thanked me for the offer but stated that the HOA could not in good conscience hire someone who was actively violating community standards. He suggested I remove my truck from the property permanently and pay the outstanding fines, and then perhaps we could discuss future business relationships. I read the email 3 times, each time feeling more incredulous. They would rather let the entire neighborhood remain buried in snow than accept help from someone they were in a dispute with. It was spite, pure and simple, dressed up in bureaucratic language. I forwarded Donald's email to several neighbors I was friendly with, adding a simple note. I offered to plow our streets. This was their response. Within hours, my phone started ringing. People were furious. They could not believe the HOA was prioritizing a petty dispute over the welfare of the community. That evening, an impromptu meeting formed at the Ramirez house. About 15 residents showed up, all angry about the situation. Someone had printed out copies of my entire email exchange with the HOA about the truck, as well as Donald's rejection of my plowing offer. We spent 2 hours discussing what could be done. Maria Ramirez suggested organizing a petition to recall the HOA board. Under the Pinewood Estates bylaws, a recall vote could be triggered if 25% of homeowners signed a petition requesting it. With about 80 homes in the development, that meant we needed at least 20 signatures. We got 32 signatures that night and over the next 2 days. People were fed up, not just with the mail situation but with Karen's entire approach to running the HOA. Stories came out about other petty violations, heavy-handed enforcement, and a general atmosphere of surveillance and control. One family had been fined for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. Another had been cited for planting flowers that were not on the approved landscaping list. The petition was delivered to the HOA office on January 8th. Under the bylaws, the board had 30 days to schedule a recall vote. In the meantime, the streets remained unplowed and mail delivery remained suspended. Karen must have panicked, because on January 9th, the HOA sent out an emergency notice offering a $500 bounty to any resident who could arrange for snow removal of the development streets within 48 hours. It was a desperate move, and it did not work. None of us had the connections or equipment to make it happen. By January 10th, the situation had attracted media attention. A reporter from the Rutland Herald somehow got wind of the story and published an article titled, "HOA Dispute Leaves Neighborhood Without Mail." The article laid out the basic facts. The HOA had banned a resident's plow truck. That resident had offered to clear the streets. The HOA had refused, and now the entire community was suffering. The article quoted Karen Morrison as saying the HOA was actively working to resolve the situation, and quoted me as saying I remained willing to help if the HOA dropped its enforcement actions against my truck. The article spread on social media. Suddenly, people across the state were weighing in with opinions. Most sided with me, seeing the HOA's actions as absurdly petty. A few sided with the HOA, arguing that rules were rules and that communities needed standards. But even among those people, there was general agreement that refusing my help was cutting off their nose to spite their face. On January 12th, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. It was a Postal Service supervisor named Margaret Wheeler. She explained that the suspension of mail delivery had now stretched beyond a week, which was triggering additional federal review. The post office had obligations to deliver mail, but they also had obligations to protect their workers. She wanted to know if there was any timeline for when the streets would be safe. I explained that I had offered to clear the streets, but the HOA had refused my services. Margaret was silent for a moment, then said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Mr. Bradley, if the streets remain impassable and the suspension continues for more than 14 days, the Postal Service will likely reclassify this development's delivery status. That could mean permanent suspension of door-to-door service. Residents would have to collect mail from the post office indefinitely, or we might install cluster boxes at the edge of the development near the main road. Either way, it would be a significant and potentially permanent change." I thanked her for the information and immediately sent another email to the HOA board, copying all 32 petition signers. I relayed exactly what Margaret had told me and emphasized that we were facing permanent loss of mail delivery if something did not change immediately. I renewed my offer to clear the streets at my standard rate, with the additional condition that all fines against me be dropped, and that the HOA acknowledge in writing that my truck was permitted to park in my driveway. This time, the response came from the HOA's lawyer. The email was long and filled with legalese, but the gist was that the HOA was willing to hire me for emergency snow removal as an independent contractor, but that this arrangement would not affect the ongoing violation enforcement. In other words, they would pay me to plow the streets, but they would continue fining me for having the truck. It was insane. I sent back a one-line response. No deal. The residents who had signed the petition were getting more organized. Maria Ramirez had taken a leadership role, coordinating communication and keeping people informed. She set up a phone tree so news could spread quickly. On January 14th, she organized a protest outside the HOA office. About 20 people showed up with homemade signs. "Let Owen plow," one sign read. "HOA incompetence equals no mail," read another. Karen Morrison called the police on the protesters, claiming they were trespassing and harassing her. 2 officers from the Millbrook Police Department showed up, took statements from both sides, and determined that the protesters were on public property and had every right to be there. One of the officers, a middle-aged woman named Officer Patricia Reynolds, seemed particularly unimpressed with Karen's complaints. "Madam, these people are peacefully expressing their frustration with a legitimate problem," Officer Reynolds said. "They are not breaking any laws. If you are feeling harassed, I suggest you address their concerns rather than trying to silence them." Karen's face went red, but she did not argue further. The protest continued for another hour before people got too cold and went home. That evening, I got a call from Donald Simmons. His tone was conciliatory, almost pleading. He explained that the situation had gotten out of hand and that the board wanted to find a resolution. He asked if I would be willing to meet privately with him and one other board member, Linda Foster, to discuss a compromise. I was skeptical but agreed. We met the next morning at a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook, neutral territory. Donald and Linda both looked tired. Linda explained that Karen had been overruling the rest of the board on the truck issue, insisting that giving in would set a bad precedent. But now, with the recall petition, the media attention, and the threat of permanent mail delivery changes, the other board members were ready to push back. "We want to resolve this," Linda said. "We will drop all the fines and put in writing that your truck is permitted. But we need something from you too. We need you to agree to remove the plow attachment when it is not actively snowing or when you are not working, just so it looks less industrial when it is sitting in your driveway." I considered this. It was not an unreasonable request, and removing the plow attachment took maybe 30 minutes. I could live with that compromise, but I wanted something else too. "I will agree to that on one condition," I said. "Karen Morrison resigns as HOA president. She has been abusing her position, not just with me but with other residents. This whole situation happened because she could not stand the idea of someone challenging her authority. If she stays, this will just happen again with someone else." Donald and Linda looked at each other. After a long pause, Linda nodded slowly. "I think we can make that happen. The recall petition already has her spooked. If we present this as a way to save face and avoid the recall vote, she might take it." We shook hands and agreed to present the proposal to the full board at an emergency meeting that evening. I went home cautiously optimistic. The emergency meeting was tense. All 5 board members were present, along with about 30 residents who had heard about the meeting through the phone tree. Karen sat at the head of the table, her expression tight and defensive. Donald presented the compromise proposal. "Drop all fines against me. Officially approve my truck with the condition that I remove the plow when not in use. And Karen would step down as president while remaining on the board as a general member." Karen exploded. She accused Donald of betrayal, called the compromise a surrender to mob rule, and insisted that the truck still violated the spirit of the community guidelines even if the letter of the law was unclear. She went on for nearly 10 minutes before Linda finally interrupted her. "Karen, this is not about winning or losing. This is about doing what is best for the community. We have no mail delivery. Our streets are buried. 32 homeowners have signed a petition to remove the entire board. We are facing a crisis, and you are making it worse by refusing to compromise." "I am making it worse." Karen's voice rose to nearly a shout. "I have dedicated 5 years to this board, 5 years of thankless work trying to maintain standards while everyone else just wants to do whatever they want. If we let him keep that ugly truck in his driveway, what is next? RVs? Boats? Work trailers? Where does it end?" "It ends with reasonable people making reasonable decisions," Donald said firmly. "I am calling for a vote. All in favor of accepting the compromise as presented." Linda's hand went up immediately. Mark Chen, the secretary who had been silent until now, raised his hand. Donald raised his own hand. That was 3 votes, a majority of the 5-member board. Patricia Wells hesitated, then slowly raised her hand too. That left only Karen opposed. "This vote is invalid," Karen said desperately. "I am the president. You cannot override me like this." "Actually, we just did," Linda said. "And Karen, I am also calling for a vote on your position as president. We can do this the easy way with you stepping down voluntarily, or we can do it the hard way with a formal removal vote. Your choice." Karen looked around the table, seeing no support. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stood up. "Fine. You want me gone, I am gone. But when this whole development goes to hell because nobody is willing to enforce standards, do not come crying to me." She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent for a moment, Then someone in the audience started clapping. Others joined in. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Donald officially read the resolution into the record. All fines against Owen Bradley were dismissed. His truck and plow were approved for parking in his driveway, with the condition that the plow attachment be removed when not in active use. And Karen Morrison had resigned as president. Donald would assume the role of acting president until a new election could be held. After the meeting, at least a dozen people came up to shake my hand or thank me for not backing down. It felt good but also exhausting. I just wanted to go home, hook up the plow, and clear the damn streets. Which is exactly what I did. Starting the next morning, January 16th, I spent 2 full days clearing every street in Pinewood Estates. The snow was heavy and compacted, made worse by nearly 2 weeks of being driven over by the few residents who had 4-wheel drive. My plow scraped over asphalt in some places and struggled with the weight in others. But slowly, methodically, I worked through the entire development. Neighbors came out to watch and thank me. Some offered me coffee or snacks. One family insisted on paying me directly even though the HOA was covering the cost. I politely declined. This was not about the money anymore. This was about doing the right thing and proving a point. By the evening of January 17th, every street was clear. I drove to the post office and spoke with Margaret Wheeler, the supervisor who had called me earlier. She said she would send an inspector to verify the streets were safe, and if approved, mail delivery would resume immediately. The inspector came the next morning. Mail delivery resumed that afternoon. When I saw the postal truck drive through the development without hesitation, stopping at each mailbox cluster to deliver a backlog of nearly 2 weeks of mail, I felt a sense of satisfaction that no paycheck could match. The HOA paid my invoice within a week. The amount was fair, covering the 2 days of intensive work and a small premium for the urgency. I used some of the money to buy a quick attach system for my plow, making it even easier to remove and reinstall the blade. I kept my word and removed the plow whenever it was not needed, storing it neatly beside my garage. Karen Morrison stayed on the HOA board as a general member but rarely attended meetings after her resignation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was considering moving to a different development, somewhere with stricter rules and more like-minded people. I wished her well, in a distant sort of way. Donald Simmons turned out to be a much more reasonable president. He reached out to residents, asked for input on decisions, and generally tried to reduce the adversarial relationship the HOA had developed under Karen's leadership. In March, a formal election was held and Donald was confirmed as president with overwhelming support. The recall petition was withdrawn since the primary grievance had been resolved. But the experience had energized a lot of residents who had previously paid no attention to HOA politics. The new board included 2 members elected specifically on a platform of common sense enforcement and transparency. As for me, I kept working, kept plowing snow when it fell, and kept living my life in Pinewood Estates. My truck sat in the driveway, clean and uncontroversial, the plow attachment stored beside the garage when not in use. Nobody complained. Nobody sent violation notices. It was as it should have been from the beginning. The winter of that year turned out to be one of the snowiest on record for Vermont. We got over 100 inches of total accumulation, with major storms every week through February. I was busier than I had ever been, and my reputation for reliability earned me 3 new contracts for the following year. The irony was not lost on me. The HOA's attempt to ban my truck had ended up giving me more publicity and credibility than any advertising could have achieved. In late March, when the snow finally started to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, I received a handwritten letter in my mailbox. It was from an elderly woman named Dorothy Hughes who lived 3 streets over. She thanked me for standing up to the HOA and for plowing the streets when nobody else would. She wrote that she had been scared during those weeks without mail delivery because she depended on medications that came through the post, and she had felt abandoned by the very organization that was supposed to represent her interests. My actions, she wrote, had restored her faith that there were still people willing to do the right thing even when it was difficult. I kept that letter in a drawer in my kitchen. Whenever I felt frustrated with work or questioned whether any of it mattered, I would take it out and read it again. That letter represented what the whole fight had been about. Not my truck, not the HOA's authority, but the basic idea that communities are supposed to help each other, not tear each other down over petty rules and power games. The legal threat of the lien disappeared along with the fines. I never heard from the HOA's lawyer again. The thousands of dollars in bogus penalties evaporated as if they had never existed. I did not pursue any legal action against the HOA for the harassment, even though James Peterman, the lawyer I had consulted, said I probably had a case. I just wanted to move on. Summer came and I switched over to my warm weather work, landscaping, deck repairs, general property maintenance. The plow attachment sat unused beside my garage, waiting for the next winter. Sometimes I would see it while mowing my lawn and smile, remembering everything it had represented during those crazy weeks. In August, the HOA organized a community barbecue in the common area. It was Donald's idea, a way to bring everyone together and rebuild the sense of neighborhood that had been damaged by years of Karen's heavy-handed enforcement. I went, bringing potato salad and a cooler of drinks. It was a good day, warm and sunny, with kids playing on the grass and adults standing around in small groups talking and laughing. Donald pulled me aside at one point and thanked me again for handling the situation the way I had. "You could have made this a lot uglier," he said. "You could have sued, gone to the media more aggressively, really dragged us through the mud. The fact that you just wanted a fair resolution speaks well of you." I shrugged. I just wanted to keep my truck and do my job. Everything else was unnecessary drama. "Still," Donald said, "you stood up for yourself and it made a difference. A lot of people learned from that, me included." As the afternoon wore on and the sun started to set, I looked around at my neighbors, at the kids chasing each other between the picnic tables, at the easy conversations and genuine smiles. This was what a community was supposed to be. Not a collection of rules and violations, but people choosing to live near each other and finding ways to get along despite their differences. Karen Morrison made a brief appearance at the barbecue, staying for maybe 20 minutes before leaving quietly. She did not speak to me, and I did not seek her out. Some grudges take a long time to fade, and some never do. But we managed to coexist in the same neighborhood without further conflict, which was good enough. As fall approached and the weather started to cool, I began preparing for the next winter season. I serviced the plow, changed fluids, replaced worn parts. I renewed my contracts and picked up a couple new ones. The phone calls started coming in as they did every October, people wanting to make sure they were on my schedule for snow removal. When the first snow fell in early November, light dustings that barely covered the ground, I felt that familiar anticipation. Winter was my busy season, the time when my work mattered most. I attached the plow to my truck, checked the hydraulics, and drove out to handle the first jobs of the season. And when I returned home that evening, I parked the truck in my driveway without a second thought. No violation notices appeared. No tow trucks showed up. No emails arrived threatening fines or liens. It was just my truck in my driveway, exactly where it belonged. Life in Pinewood Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA continued to function, but with a lighter touch and more input from residents. Rules were still enforced, but with common sense and flexibility. People still occasionally disagreed about things, but those disagreements were resolved through conversation rather than threats. I thought sometimes about how close it had all come to going a different way. If I had given in immediately and moved the truck, I would have spent years dealing with the inconvenience and expense, and Karen would have learned that bullying tactics worked. If I had escalated too aggressively, lawyers and courts could have bankrupted me even if I ultimately won. The path I chose, standing firm but staying open to reasonable compromise, had worked out in the end, but it had been a near thing. The following winter brought its own challenges and storms, but nothing compared to the chaos of that previous year. The Pinewood Estates streets were cleared promptly by a new contracted company, though I was on call as a backup in case they could not keep up. Mail delivery continued without interruption. Life went on. Years later, when people asked me about the HOA fight, I would tell them it was not really about a truck. It was about respect, about power, about whether a community organization exists to serve its members or to control them. It was about standing up for what was right even when it was inconvenient and expensive to do so. And it was about snow, that cold white reality that does not care about bylaws or community standards or property values. Snow just falls, and when it does, you need someone with a plow to clear it. Everything else is just noise. I never regretted keeping that truck. I never regretted standing up to Karen Morrison and the HOA board. And I never forgot the lesson that sometimes the most important fights are the ones over things that seem small and stupid, because those fights reveal who we really are and what we value. My name is Owen Bradley, and I live in Pinewood Estates in Millbrook, Vermont. I own a Ford F-350 with a snow plow attachment, and I park it in my driveway. That simple fact once threatened to destroy my life, but in the end, it made me stronger and made my community better. And that is a trade I would make any day.